Hello and welcome to another, I hope, interesting video. This time what I thought that we should discuss is about T-shaped developers and full stack developers because it's a topic that has come up recently. So what prompted me to discuss this is a tweet by Ferdinando Santa Croce. And what we will do is I will read the tweet and then go through some ideas that we have related to full stack developers and T-shaped or any other types of things. And I have with me, as always, Adi. Welcome, Adi.
Hello.
So first of all, what do you think about T-shaped developers?
T-shape, I try to apply T-shape in various places, not only developers. So in any teams where it makes sense, and typically that is where you either make a transformation because you had many silos work, meaning very narrow specializations, or in teams where they need to learn a bit more and to understand more about what they're doing. And I think it makes sense in many places. It's not a direct recipe for success always and everywhere, but it does make sense as even in medicine or in surgery, and we'll talk more about that maybe later. So it's a very powerful way of working if applied well.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit through these tweets. This started with Ferdinando Santa Croce tweeting, "I'll buy the full stack developer thing when I see full stack doctors fixing bones, recommending diet plans, and performing brain surgery on a daily basis. Same for lawyers, architects, engineers. Stop thinking one dev can do everything well. Software development is a team sport." And my initial reaction to this is, yeah, I mean, there are specialties. I wouldn't expect a doctor to do brain surgery, like a general practitioner kind of doctor to do brain surgery. And I don't expect a developer to, I don't know, be very good at data science or analysis of
Security.
But I think what I do expect though is that you know a little bit of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The problem is that people, the opposite. Okay. So this is the super human who knows everything, the super developer, which is really impossible. But the opposite is someone who knows just, I don't know, let's say C++ on a certain compiler and a certain version. I don't know, C++ 8, and that's all. I don't want to know more than that. I don't want to go and learn C++ 9. Or someone who knows just front end and CSS. And that's all. No JavaScript, no nothing. So the opposite is a very narrow specialization, which generally becomes very impractical, especially when you have very complex products. And let's face it, more and more of these products are more and more complex because you'll need mobile, you need UI, you need some backend code, you need some databases, you need so on and so forth. So these are the two extremes, okay? None of them is good. So we need to be somewhere in between.
Yeah, and the thing is, I would call myself full stack developer, but I also know what my limitations are, right? So I can write JavaScript. I don't really like it, but I can. I know HTML, I know CSS fairly well. I know how to write backend code in a number of programming languages, Python, Java, C#, and so on. I know how to create a database, how to structure a database, and things like that. But there are things that I don't know. So for example, I'm not really an expert in databases, in optimizing databases, in configuring MySQL to work faster or better or more reliably or things like that.
Yes. So database administration, basically.
Yeah. But I do know the basics. I know how to set up, to install MySQL. I know how to create a MySQL database. I know how to set up users, to create tables, to make relationships, to do queries. I can do all that, right? And I can do that for MongoDB. I can do that for PostgreSQL. I can do that for a number of things. But if I really want to optimize something, I will go to somebody who actually knows what they are doing, because, yeah, I'm not that good at that side of things.
And I guess it's the same for security, which is very specific.
Absolutely. So I know I happen to have a good mindset for finding potential security problems, but I'm not an expert in doing things like pen testing or stuff like that, right? So,
Or for application performance, to do load testing or stress testing and so on.
yeah, and I can, for example, write some tests in, I don't know, perf, jperf, or whatever was the name of that tool. Yeah, but when it goes into statistics, for example, like interpreting the statistical data of performance over time based on various models, that's a specialized skill once again. So
yeah.
And so I guess this is what I answered. And maybe it seems a bit weird that we started talking about Tshape developers, but the tweet was about full stack developers. But the reason is, my answer was, I think of full stack developers in the context of Tshape skills. You don't have to be an expert in everything, but to know enough to help your colleagues when needed.
So let's rewind a bit and explain what Tshape is. Tshape means that, so think like you start with a letter T, and your T, the vertical line is your main knowledge, your main specialization. So let's say, I don't know, you know Java, okay? Java is the best thing, the best language you know. And then you put from parallel to that vertical line, you put another smaller line about Python, let's say. So you don't know Python that much. And you put another one about JavaScript, which is just tiny small. And that means you're just a very beginner, just beginning to learn JavaScript. And it can be with everything, with performance, business analysis, architecture. But you can also look at it from other points of view, from the business domains point of view. Maybe you know very well telecom, but you don't know that well banking, or you know very well something that's, I don't know, other areas, e-commerce and so on. So you can look at it from this point of view as well. Basically, there are skills. So I think what is important to look at is the mindset of stop thinking about development as being a Java developer, a Python developer, a C# developer, but start thinking as a team member who has various skills.
Yeah.
More or less advanced.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this conversation has gone. So Ferdinando answered exactly, just as any doctor knows how to bandage a wound and give CPR, for example, a dev knows how to complete basic tasks in various areas. Sometimes it seems to me that companies expect devs to be experts in everything from CSS to the most esoteric Kubernetes configurations, and frankly, I find this difficult to apply. There are exceptions, sure, but I don't think that's the average. And one thing that I noticed related to this, it used to be quite simple, like maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago.
Maybe a bit more.
to be a full stack developer on web, right? Because what you needed was HTML, you needed JavaScript and jQuery, you needed CSS, and you needed some kind of backend thing, Java or whatever you had, Rails or Python, or right. And this was enough for you to build any kind of web application. Of course, for more complex enterprisey applications, you'd also need other things like Spring, like all kind of other things. But this was fairly enough. The problem is that in the recent years, the web front-end thing has become madly complicated. And part of it is essential because we need more features on the front end, we need more responsiveness, we need things like, we basically need desktop applications, but they run into a browser. That's what we actually need. And of course, for this, you need all kinds of things. But part of it is actually accidental complexity. It's things that are just added for the fun of it, for exploring things, it's not really. But if you try now to keep up to date with front-end web development, I think that's a full-time job now.
Yeah, and on top of that, you also have mobile, so which is a different animal in a way. You might call it front end, but it's not front end. It's really a different way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the new desktop applications, I started doing desktop applications and I recognize these models because they are now in the
on web.
Front-end web, but also in mobile.
But on mobile, the mobile native, that's a bit different. That's what I'm saying. It's a bit there are some special things you need to know about, and there are now you have languages or frameworks that are mobile first, and they work in a different way, and you need to understand that as well.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, there are different technologies, and indeed, honestly, I don't think you can, at this point in time, I don't think you can be really good. I mean, maybe you can, but it's very rare to be really good at Angular and React and all the new things in front-end web and back-end and mobile on Android and mobile on iOS.
Of course. And don't forget that more and more we want to focus on UX design. So you also, besides knowing pretty well how to work on front end, you also should, I think, if you're doing front end, at least have some basic knowledge about UX and what you should never do. And maybe have someone who is more advanced in your team and to give a review on what you're doing in that front end. So with this, it becomes even more difficult.
And I think Ferdinando is also right saying that there's another thing in the mix, which is DevOps. So we have Kubernetes, we have Docker, we have Puppet, Chef, all kinds of things and tools that you can use there.
And there are more and more tools on that area.
It's more and more. And so that's where my answer here came from. I'm wondering whether it's a cycle. I think that we go through a cycle that is, first we remove work through automation and simplicity. This opens up new areas of innovation, and then we create a lot of alternative and complexity. And then we go back and we start removing some of those, and we kind of go like this. And I think we are in the cycle, at least for some of these things, where we created a lot of alternatives and complexity, particularly in those two where we discussed DevOps and front-end web. It's
with DevOps, especially because it's a newer domain, and of course you need to explore, you need to invent things, and they need to refine to a moment where we agree it's a good idea, and then probably you can automate more.
Yeah. But for me, so what I'm thinking is that, okay, I agree that you cannot be an expert in all these things. Absolutely. Can you can you maybe, help your colleagues? So let's say you are a backend developer and you know programming. Can you maybe help your colleague who is doing iOS development using Swift at some point in time if they need to?
Yeah, so that's the idea. How I explain this T-shape is the minimum thing if you want to be in a team, in a cross-functional team that tries to be more efficient, more independent. You need to understand what the other's concerns are, what the other is doing, what they need to do, and that's the first step in T-shape. So, and it doesn't apply necessarily only to programmers. It applies to anyone. So someone who comes from business, from never ever done programming, they know, as I said, I don't know, e-commerce, and they've done e-commerce, and now they want to build a product, and they join this team, and they need to understand what software architecture is, do the minimum basics. They need to understand what programming is, what a database is. They need to understand many of things like that. In the same time, a programmer needs to understand what e-commerce is and what's the jargon there and the language and so on. And maybe you have a tester who needs to understand the same, what the programmer is doing and what the business is, and so on. So that's what I mean. The minimum thing is try to understand what the others are doing, what is their viewpoint, what are their concerns, what they want to achieve. And that's what you need to do if you want to have efficient flow of value. So to build good products that bring value to your customers.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've heard is instead of T-shape or these things, another way of thinking about it is we also need generalists, not only experts, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
a generalist would be able to work within a specific domain, let's say e-commerce, knows that domain, knows the language, knows the jargon, and then can apply general principles from software architecture, from business analysis, from security, to the job so that it works smoother, basically. Right? But when you need something of expertise, like how do I configure RabbitMQ to be faster or scale, or then yes, then I call in experts. It's absolutely.
Yes. The thing is that if you don't have such a generalist in your team, you often forget that you need something. And what happens is that you get into that situation of emergency, of fire, because something happened. Like we put in production and the performance is down by 90%. Oh, we forgot to do some database optimization, or we forgot to put a load balancer on a queue, or things like that. So that's why you need the generalist to say, we have this, to put the questions, to understand the situation, and then ask for the expert to do their job on that specific thing.
Yeah. And I think, part of the job is know what you don't know or what you are not very good at.
Yes. So I think that this idea of a generalist is kind of the glue that makes sure that the risk is in a way minimized, that you need to look at this as well from the risk management point of view.
Yeah, and it's so basically it's uh, the discussion continued with Matteo Cavucci saying, well, isn't that the equivalent of GPs? GPs are general practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think your family doctor is a GP, but there
Yes.
are GPs who are not family doctors. So these are general practitioners, people you go to and can look at you and say, okay, you have these symptoms, maybe I can fix these, or maybe I need to send you to somebody who has expertise in something specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot, what Matteo says, you won't run a hospital only on GPs, but it doesn't mean you have no place for GPs in the healthcare, right?
Exactly. So, as I said in the beginning, we'll start this conversation as well for with doctors.
Mm.
One of there's this American doctor, Atul Gawande, who has very nice book on checklists, but also other articles. I think he writes in the New Yorker as a columnist, and he explains something that's very close to what software development is in surgery, because he's a surgeon. He explains how you want to have some very basic things, like when the team gets together in the operating room, they need to to know to say how they're called, their names basically, and because it shows that you perform much better like that. But other things are interesting here. How complex. So he writes how complex these operations became, because 20 years ago it was like, I don't know, two doctors, but now for something that's, I don't know, like a hip surgery, you need something like 20 doctors. So you see, complexity grows in the same way as software development. And these doctors need to understand each other. These 20 doctors that sometimes work together in an operating room, or maybe they're not all doctors, nurses, and others, but they're a few surgeons and maybe a few others. Um, they need to know what they're doing, and they need to understand each other.
Yeah.
If they wouldn't have learned what, in maybe also in practice, but also in university, what the others are doing, by learning that skills to the minimum extent, they couldn't understand each other. Like for every surgery, you need some things to do, some preparations, and so on. And it's very interesting because it struck me that it's very close to how cross-functional team works in software development.
Yeah, absolutely. And the role of nurses is very, very important. I remember there's one nurse whose only responsibility is to make sure that everybody scrubs.
Mm-hmm.
So and you think, okay, these are doctors, why don't they do it? Well, you know.
Yeah, it happens. So it's the same like thinking, make sure that the code that you wrote is respects the coding guidelines.
Yeah.
It's a bit the same. Sanity check.
Sometimes you are very focused on what you are doing and forget about the other
Yeah,
things.
you're tired or whatever. And so this is very interesting that also in you have the same problem also in medicine. And you do have these generalists like the GPs. You do have the very narrow specialized like brain surgery and so on. Um, but a GP needs to know how, in order, after some types of work, to send you to a neurologist or to to some specialized doctors.
Yeah.
And that's the glue that I mentioned in a way. With the generalist in software development, you need that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, very soon somebody came, well, Pietro Campagnano came with uh, a counter example. There are people like Levelsio, I don't know this person, but apparently he's well known, that make product marketing, UI programming, and make 3 million a year in sales. They are specialists and generalists. It's okay. We are all different.
Of course. I mean, I think you can do that, but I'm sure that also that person is not, cannot know very deep database management and security and performance and programming languages and sales and do them all at once. So I'm sure you take a pick to where you bring more value and you collaborate with others, but you can have meaningful conversations and be a lot more effective because you know what to talk about.
Yeah, and from my point of view, usually when you hear these types of stories that there's a solo person who does something, if you dig a bit deeper, they have some collaborators that help them.
Exactly. But that's the key. They have the collaborators and they work well together.
Mm.
In order to work well, you need to understand each other. You need to have the same language, jargon. So it makes sense that you go back to Tshape in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, then I like this one. Cruding data into database through web server from Bootstrap frontend is very far from brain surgery. Indeed. Yeah. If
It's
all you're doing is CRUD applications, then please don't tell me you cannot do them alone. I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah. It depends how many technologies you have.
Yeah. What else was interesting? Full stack developer wanted will accept mediocre at every level of the stack in order to save money. That's kind of the cynical view of this. The goal is not to save money, no, really.
Yeah.
Because we have
because you're not saving money.
Yeah, indeed. We have a different problem. Let's say you have an expert in every single domain that you need. How large will your team be? Probably 20 people.
Mm-hmm.
Now.
Yes. And everybody will be busy in a different moment in time.
Okay. For these 20 people, you need how many coordinators to make sure that they are actually working on the same thing?
Well, depending on how many projects you have, probably 50 or something.
Yeah, but let's say you have one project, but you need 20 people because you are only using experts. I'm guessing you need one for every 5 to 7, right? That's usually the number. So you probably need about 4 coordinators. When you have 4 coordinators, you need somebody to coordinate the coordinators, so you need another one.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly you have 25 people working on something.
Yeah.
The problem is not necessarily that it costs more. The problem is how much coordination do you need to put in place so that this thing actually works?
And it's not only coordination, but it's also, there's that schema. I forgot how it's called, but if you put a connection between everybody, how many connections you have, it determines the complexity of your team.
Yeah.
So if you have 2 people, you have 1 line. If you have 3 people, you have 1 from each other, so you have 3 lines. If you have and so on. So it grows exponentially. I cannot make now the computation exactly, but I think if you have something like 25 people, you probably have something 100 and something connections.
Yeah.
And that may mean that's the number of meetings you need to have in order to make sure that something works well.
Yeah.
That's the overhead that you have because you have a very large team.
Yeah.
So this is the problem, in fact, and this is not efficient in any way.
Yeah. So the solution that we found, which maybe is not the perfect one, but what we found is that if you have small teams that can adapt, and if you also have experts on hand that you can call whenever you are missing something, then you obtain the same result but faster.
Yeah, so you have these people who have Tshape, so they like if you have in that team, let's say that your business is mainly web front end something, you're making something in front, so in that team probably the people will have the main expertise in front end, but everybody, you should have someone in the team know a bit about performance, someone in the team know a bit about security, someone in the team know testing quite well because you want to test, someone in the team know a bit about database. And when you work in that team, because you're not very performance intensive, database intensive, security intensive, once something appears, someone needs to say, hey, we need to call our database expert, our security expert, and we need to have a conversation about this topic to tell us what to do. And this way you become more effective. You have less overhead, so less meetings, you have less coordination, you deliver value faster. So I think also with this Tshape, you shouldn't go to extremes like everyone, you should know everything. It doesn't work. I think you need to be focused on your value that you're bringing and your product's full scope.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So this is the problem. The problem is actually that if you have a lot of people, there's a lot of coordination, and we want results faster and ideally better, but at least the same, same level, if not better, right? All right. Anything else you would like to add?
I think that all of these terms are confusing, like Fullstack, Tshape, Generalist, or specialized generalist, or I don't know, all you can see all these terms going around, and all of them are confusing. You need so much explanation for every of these terms, and I guess every implementation is a bit different. So even if you use Tshape, I saw very different implementations of these situations in different organizations. So the best thing is, before you hear someone say Tshape or Fullstack, ask 3-4 questions about what do you mean about that, how would you implement it, because it may mean something very different than what you think it means.
So I know at a personal level, I have become a bit of an expert on developing things in a certain way, in a way that we need for our infrastructure in Mosaic Works. So I can do those things. Like many of the things that we do are either websites or integrations between our own websites and other infrastructure pieces. And for those, I learned how to do quite a specific process that works. But I also have a strong basis in other things. So maybe I'm more like a pyramid with with an eye on top instead of a T.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we should present it. Like, you need to have a strong basis, and then you add on top things that help you in your job that you're doing. fundamentally to me that would be perhaps, yeah, perhaps a better model than T-shaped, or because what I really like to see is people who know how to write code really well. And then when they learn a new programming language, they can apply the same techniques into the new programming language. And of course, it's a different syntax, different specific things there, but in the end, it's still programming. I mean, and unless you're doing something completely different, like data science instead of web applications, then they should port quite easily.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for now. A quick chat this time. Full stack developers, T-shaped. What do you think? What is your context? What are your concerns? Ask us in the comments. Let us know. Well, and tell us if you'd like us to discuss about other interesting topics that are valuable for you and for your context. Please like, share, subscribe. Please leave us a comment if you want to tell us anything. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.